the Highly Addicted Podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Josh.
I'm CJ.
And yeah, man, really excited to have CJ on with us. We got, he's a family man, he's a veteran, and he's really active in the recovery community. Reaches out and helps people, first responders generally, who have undergone trauma, and helps them work through it. That's pretty amazing, man. Like,
thanks,
good
man.
on
Thanks.
Yeah, great to see you out here, man. Haven't seen you in a minute.
Yeah, it's been a while, eh? No, I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited for this.
I mean, we're excited
to just get into shit.
Yeah, man. Our first video podcast, and it's good to have you on.
Had to go all out and get the camera.
I was gonna wear all black, slim myself out a bit. I gotta go with the white today.
You're looking good.
Looks
man.
good
It's
on
all
you.
good.
Thanks.
And you have quite the story. So I mean, maybe we'll just
let me jump right into it, eh?
Where did it kind of start out for you? Yeah, I mean, usually we'll plug our fundraiser and stuff like that, but let's just.
Oh, you go ahead if you need to.
I mean, really, is there any updates from last week?
We got some nice handmade glasses. I put a post up about that for my friend Krista at Rainbow Organics. She made some handmade. She's got a kiln and made her own kiln. It was pretty cool.
Pretty fucking awesome.
But so we're still collecting donations for the fundraiser that we're doing. We're gonna put some gift baskets together and raffle them off to get some more audio-visual equipment. But other than that, I'd like to get right into it, man. And so where to kind of start off for you as far as addiction goes?
I come from a town that's known for its I come from a town out east in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, that's known for its opiate epidemic. It was the first opiate epidemic in North America, in Canada at least. I might be lying a little bit there, but I'll never forget the day. Growing up, I had a somewhat decent childhood. I had some sexual stuff happen when I was pretty young. When I was like 4 or 5. Not by a family member, so it was never at my house. But like everybody, at that time I didn't know it was wrong, so I didn't know to talk about it. And I'd love to say that it didn't really affect me, but ultimately it did. It shaped the way I ended up being, like, by a long shot. But yeah, and then other than that, my childhood was pretty good. I had an incident. My mom got sick when I was 12, and like from 12 till say 16, I'd say I started to act out in different ways, and one of the first ways I started to act out was women, relationships, as well as drugs, and experimented, and I always wanted to be with the using crowd because I thought that was the cool thing to do. And when I was 15 years old, so at this point I'd like experimented with almost everything, and
right. So you've been kind of doing what I think a lot of kids do. I know that was kind of my experience. I had drank, smoked some weed, maybe drop some mushrooms or something, like some acid or something like that at that time.
Ultimately, I did whatever everybody else was doing, right? If that was drinking, or if that ecstasy was pretty big back then. So if somebody was taking one of the little blue spacemen, and I'd jump on board. But I don't think that at that time anything really hit me. And I'll never forget. My mom and dad were out of town. I'd mentioned my mom was sick, and my dad was taking my mom to a hospital in Halifax, which is about 5 hours away. And I was staying at my grandmother's, and I told my grandmother that I was staying at my buddy's, and of course it's your grandmother, so she doesn't know any difference, right?
Yeah.
We broke into my house. There was this window that never locked, and we like snuck in the window in the basement, and we were having a party, and we probably had some drugs there, but nothing that I like. It wasn't what the party was about. The party was about, like, we were both about to sleep with our high school sweethearts. And I remember my buddy coming into the bathroom being like, dude, take this. And I was like, what is it? And he's like, just do it. And I was like, all right, man. And you know, like I would say 15 minutes later, I just remember it hitting me. And I just remember going downstairs and saying to him, like, dude, this is going to be a problem. Like, those were my exact words. And he's like, fuck off. And I'm like, no, dude, like, this is going to be a problem. And right then and there, I think I knew that opiates, it was a Percocet. And I think I knew right then and there that drugs were going to be, that drug in particular was going to be something to take a hold of me, you know? And
just because you just, like, off the bat, you just like it so much.
That feeling, like that, the feeling I got in that moment, like, took away every bit of insecurity, every bit of, like, neglect I felt, every bit of doubt I had, like, in that moment, that drug took that away. And, you know, like if you fast forward later on into the evening, it did the job that he told me it would do, you know, and I was a machine in my head. And I don't know if from that moment on, if I ever wrote a test not on it, or if I had a weekend not on it until, you know, like I was 26, so like 10 straight years. There was a few periods where, you know, I was absent from stuff, but not by choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but that was kind of the drug. Your drug of choice was just like Percocet or just opiates.
Opiates, yeah. So it like very quickly escalated. Of course, like, you know, 1 became 2, became 4, became 5, and then OxyContin was cheaper. You know, and I even remember that day, like I was again staying at my grandmother's, and my buddy picked me up, and he's like, I can't get any perks, man. And I was like, well, what can we get? And he's like, my buddy's got these pills. They're really good. I was like, fucking let's do it.
Same buddy?
No, different buddy. And we got them, and fuck, I just remember going back to my grandmother's house, throwing up for like a solid 10 minutes, going and laying on the couch, and just felt like I was on top of the world.
Those are like, we're talking about 80s now?
Yeah, well, I'd say not at that time. I think I was probably like 20s or 40s at that time, but the little gold nuggets, but
it was a step up from.
It was definitely a step up, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say that was probably only 4 months after I'd started taking perks. Mm-hmm. So it escalated to the highest opiate I could get at that time really quick.
And you're 16 at this point?
I was 16, 17, yeah. So, you know, part of my story you mentioned is being a veteran, and it's kind of weird because at this, so 15, summer of 15, I'm experimenting with a lot of drugs. 16, I just about to turn 16, and my, you know, there was a mental health issue in my family, and shit hit the fan. And I remember walking into the high school on my 16th birthday, and I looked to my left, and sure enough, there was the Canadian Forces recruiters sitting in the lobby. And I don't know why, and I don't know, like, there was no preconceived idea of like the military was the thing. The only idea I had of the army was I had one uncle, and he seemed to be the only person in any side of the family that really had their shit together. He was in the army. So I think that like planted a seed. And that day, my 16th birthday, so it would have been 2005. I signed up to join the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves, and I think so. That was October 21st, and June 22nd of 06, I was sworn in as an infanteer in the Canadian Army Reserves. So. Yeah,
and that's like right around the time that your addiction was kind of just like taking off.
Just flourishing. Yeah, like
yeah, that's crazy.
And I think like in that moment when I joined, that was an escape. Like the drugs were an escape from like the reality I was in, but the army was an escape from where I lived. Mm-hmm. And like most people, like we blame it on where we live or our family situation or our living situation. But ultimately for me, the drugs were an escape from reality, and then the army was an escape from the place.
So you just kind of it's subconsciously you just want to get out of Dodge and.
Yeah, like I want it to be gone. I like I said, I come from a small town, so nobody really gets up to anything good there, you know, and I was very, very quickly falling victim to that exact thing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, just to backtrack a little, like, after that initial trauma, like you said, at 5 years old, like, I don't know if that's too early for you to remember, but do you think, like, there was, like, big, like, warning signs, like, that you were going down a bad path after that, like, in terms of the way that you coped with that at such a young age, or?
I would say yes and no, and the reason I'd say that is it didn't show up in that type of way.
Mm-hmm.
What I feel is the most direct result of what happened to me at a young age is I was like a 12, 13, 14-year-old boy that now knew how to manipulate his way around a woman's body. And I use that to my advantage. So I don't see the addiction aspect of it like really quick. But what I'll say is like, you know, 5 or 10 years after that, I'm doing an addictive behaviors from directly attached to what I learned at such a young age, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, like, and to backtrack, like I'm okay talking about it now, right? Like at that age, I was like being told to get naked and like I was being like placated essentially with a female student by a teacher. And I never understood the effect that had on me until like years and years down the road when I realized like at 12 years old, I was like sleeping with people much older. And I was like a wanted, it's hard to say like wanted, but like sexually, mm-hmm. I was like known in that area. But it wasn't because I was good at it. It was because I was taught so young, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it like played a big effect moving forward. So my first addiction ultimately was women, right? Like was ladies.
Well, and I'm sure that played into like the kind of ego of like wanting to be the cool guy and
absolutely.
Stuff like that. And then drugs just
absolutely
coincide with it so easily.
And then if you think about it, right? Like saying that's my first addiction, and then somebody gives me at 16 or 15, gives me a pill that's gonna like enhance that first addiction, right? Like it blew up.
Yeah, that's something we I don't think we've really talked about on this podcast before, but that becomes a cross addiction. I know a lot of people, and myself included, who that becomes like a euphoric recall.
Yeah,
is some night that you were, you know, doing I'm like, for me it was doing ecstasy and then going on a, you know, taking the wife out of town and some, you know, kind of crazy stuff that happened while you're high on drugs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just just let's see how far we can notch the pleasure up, right? And not really thinking anything of it.
No,
you're not at the time, and like you said, you're probably not thinking at that when they're that young, like, oh, maybe I should examine my relationship to sex and examine, you know, my what's happened and stuff like that. You're just kind of
you're literally just going with what you know.
Yeah.
And like you know, not a lot of people talk about intimacy, but like I lost my sense of intimacy at 4 years old, and like it took years, right, for me to find out what intimacy was, because I didn't understand. And my idea of intimacy was sex, and then my idea of good sex was like high sex, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then my idea of better sex was really high sex, you know, like, and it just like kept escalating. And like I found myself in some pretty sketchy situations because of those two addictions hand in hand later in life, right? And so definitely. And it's interesting because, you know, I wouldn't have never looked at that stuff if I, you know, didn't need to look at that stuff to get better. And it took me a long time. Yeah, so I guess back right to where I was there, joined the Canadian Forces, and I think like another big aspect of my childhood that, I should probably touch on is I never really felt like my dad was proud of me or that my dad showed me any love. And if I don't remember, remind me towards the end to elaborate on that a little bit. But like there was a sense that I didn't belong, and it didn't only come from within, like. And I don't want to say that I'll never say anything bad about my dad. He was doing the best he could with what he had, but I didn't feel his love, and like that played a big effect.
Do you have other siblings as well? Or?
I do, yeah. So I have a younger brother. He's 4 years younger, and like kind of the way it was growing up. Like after my mom got sick, it was kind of like I was my dad's best friend, my brother's father, and my mom's savior, essentially. And what that did was that brought me and my mom really close together, and it brought my dad and my brother super close together. And like I kind of held that against my dad, and I probably kept that resentment for way too long, because I felt like like a lot of people say like I'm the oldest and like I got all the, well, I didn't feel like that. I felt like I was kind of on the back burner a lot of the time, and it was not necessarily what was happening. It was the way I was interpreting things, right?
Yeah.
And that was my distorted way of thinking.
Yeah.
So young.
Oh yeah. Yeah. With your family dynamic, like was your brother like going down a similar path as you, or like was he like, you know what I mean? Like, cause like,
yeah, no, no, he wasn't.
Yeah.
The best way to answer that is no. Like, it's funny because like my brother always looked up to me because I was like his big brother, right?
Yeah.
I think like he learned really quick. The one area I would say that he did like definitely try to follow in my footsteps was like the relationships, the women thing.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to be like his big brother. And,
well, I mean, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
it sounds
naturally,
like-
as like a younger brother, you're gonna want to
absolutely
see your brother
But-
going out on all these dates and stuff
Yeah.
or whatever, bringing girls back to the house. You're gonna be like, oh, that's fucking
And
awesome.
you're living a pretty action packed life for a
16-year-old.
for a young teenager.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like in that way, I would say yes. Like a quick story that I'll like probably jump by like later in the story. But when I was in Afghanistan, my brother was going out to the bar with my IDs, and like he was telling everybody like, yeah, I'm home. And he was getting all this love. And I'm in Afghanistan, and I finally get on the computer and I get this message from some dude being like, you slept with my woman last weekend.
Jesus.
And I was like, dude, no, I didn't. And he's like, yes, you did. I know it was you. And I was like, dude, I'm in Afghanistan. Like, I didn't sleep with your woman. And then sure enough, my brother was like, dude, I slept with Buddy's woman. And I was like, so like, I'd say like in some areas, yeah, like that aspect. But as far as like the drugs, I think because I was so hard into it when he was young, like, he was only 9, 10, 11 when I started fucking around with drugs. So he didn't, like, it was almost like he would never go there because I went there.
When your parents knew about it, like from a young age, or like he just knew about it?
Well, my mom and dad had so much going on, like with everything that was going on, that I don't know if they really noticed. Like I know my mom knew really young that I was gonna be trouble.
Yeah.
Or be in her, like, yeah, trouble, I guess is the best way to put it. But I don't know exactly when they started figuring out there was a problem.
Yeah.
To be honest. I remember like, so I joined the Canadian Forces, and at that time I was in the reserves. So the way it works in the reserves is you work like one evening a week, every second or third weekend, and then you go away the whole summer. And so I went away right away. As soon as I got in, I was away for the summer. And of course, there, like drugs, it's not big on the bases, right? Like it wasn't at that time big on the base. So I was starting to drink a little bit. I wasn't a big drinker from a young age. Like I didn't like I'm different than most addicts. I like still having control, or what I feel like is control, and alcohol never like always took away that control, but because I didn't have anything else, and like at that time, well, I guess there was a few ladies on base, but like my big thing, I would go and drink with the guys, right? And totally forgot where I was going with that, but so yeah, I was going away in the summers, and I remember, so I went away the first summer. The next, like, school year, I started selling drugs, and trying to figure out where I was going, but we're talking about like when my parents knew, and so I started selling drugs. So I would have been grade like 11,
Right.
and I was selling for this guy, and I remember I was on lunch, and this guy called and asked me, to buy everything I had, and of course, like in my mind, that meant more free drugs for me.
Mhm.
So I rolled up, and I got robbed. I walked through the door. I had a machete to my neck, and he took everything I had and said, like, "This isn't against you. This is against your supplier." And my supplier wasn't a good guy, and he threatened me and he threatened my family. And I just remember driving into my dad's work site, and he's like a carpenter, like doesn't know any of this stuff at all.
Mhm.
And I just remember pulling in and being like, "Dad, like I owe this guy $3,000
Fuck.
and I need help." And he's like, "What the fuck do you owe them $3,000 for?" And I'm like, "I'm just going to be honest with you. I've been selling drugs for the last like 6 months." And I just remember my dad picking up the phone to this guy that's calling saying like, "I'm going to burn your house down." My dad's like, "If you fucking ever talk to my son again, and like I seen my dad react in a way that I never did before. When I got home, I got sat down, and it was like, "What are you doing, CJ?" And like I lied and lied and lied, and yeah. So that would probably be the first time that they knew there was a problem. Like they could physically see something was going on. But it just really just kept escalating.
Yeah.
So that later that year, so I would graduate. I was in a long-term commitment relationship. She had fucked around with one of my buddies. Went to prom with her, right, heartbroken. In my ideal of a heartbreak, and I went to Gagetown to do a course, and at this point I got accepted into UPEI's policing program, and I got into a few other universities, but that was where my mind was set to go. And I was in Gagetown training, and I remember I was leaving. It was a Sunday, and I was leaving to go to UPEI to pay my tuition. And my warrant came out the door just as I was packing up my bags, and he's like, "Willen, if you want to go to Germany?" I was like, "When?" He's like, "Tuesday."
Fuck.
And this was like, this was Sunday. And I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm like, "Tell me when I'm going." And sure enough, instead of going to university, here I was running again.
Mhm.
And that's ultimately what it was, right? Like the fear of failure in university was way stronger because I knew I was good at what I did in the army at this point. And I went to Germany, and, like I'm on a confined base for 3 months. And we had 3 days of like R&R, rest and relaxation, like essentially like 3 days of vacation in that work period. And the night before that vacation started, me and this other fella snuck off the base, got a taxi down the Autobahn to the closest town, and went to the what's the politically correct way to say
Red. We're talking about red.
yeah went to the
Okay.
red light district.
Went to the red light district and had a bit of fun over there.
Yeah, I mean, like here we were not allowed to leave the base, and fucking we're in the town 45 minutes away, just blowing through every bit of money we have.
Yeah,
Like,
it's-
it's like super sick. We're not even leaving the building. We're just going to different rooms. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I just remember pulling back up to the base, and we made this, like we paid the security guard to not write that we left. And then we got back and it was a different security guard. So we had to like bribe this German security guard to like not like to let us back in, but like, you know, and
say that you didn't leave. Oh,
yeah. And then fucking it was like this was like 6 o'clock in the morning and roll call was 6:30. So like we were just strutting in and everybody else was getting up, and then we had to go for a 5K run.
Wow.
And I just remember being fucking gassed, but so excited that I accomplished something, right?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, dude.
And then, you know, like talk about addiction, right? Like I had no means of exploring that option there. Like there was nothing I can do. I had 3 days off, and I spent probably, so I went to the red light district 7 times in like a 24-hour period, to the point where I ran out of money. And so I owed this girl money, and I had none. So I'm at the bank machine that's like a block down the road with this big bouncer behind me. There's nothing in the bank machine. And like I'm on the phone with my mom, who's back here in Canada. So it's like 3 a.m. in Cape Breton. And like my mom answers and I'm like, Mom, I need money. My mom's like, what do you need money for? And I was like, well, I just left the I don't know a different way to say it, but I just left the red light district and I got a bouncer here that I owe money to. And my mom's like, son, you are not doing well. And I was like,
that's not the kind of call you expect.
No,
yeah, no.
3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
Well, when your son's in the military, you think,
Yeah.
oh, they're gonna fucking
Find their way.
yeah.
Yeah. But addiction's powerful, man. Like
yeah, clearly.
that was the only way I could really, I could find. And, yeah, I'll never forget that. I needed her to transfer me 70 or 50 euro, which was like 70 Canadian. So I could pull it out of the bank machine, pay this bouncer,
God.
So then that was a great experience. I come home, on the way home, kind of like in transition, I found out that there was a tour coming for Afghanistan. I was a reservist at the time. So reservists aren't guaranteed a tour. Like it's only a select few get to go. And, I'd heard that the unit that was going required at least one reservist from all of the infantry units in like our brigade, right? And so I went home and I wrote up this big memorandum, which is essentially a permission, or no, memorandum. It's essentially like a formal way to address somebody or ask somebody something, right?
Okay.
And so I wrote this big elaborate, message as how like I wanted to go to Afghanistan and all these things. And I remember giving it to my CEO, my commanding officer, and he just like laughed at me. He was like, CJ, like you're going. And I was like, really? And I was only 18 at the time, right? So here I was like 18, find out I'm going to Afghanistan, thrilled about it. Go home. The only way I could go at that time is like, like everybody had to be okay with it. And
as far as your parents,
my parents, yeah. I mean, like they didn't have to be, but I think inside of me, if they would have said no, it would have been harder for me to go. But I went home and told them that I'm going to Afghanistan. So pretty much like it's crazy because there's big periods in my life where I can remember bits and pieces, but I don't remember the actual like content of what was going on. And I remember starting to train to go to Afghanistan. At this point, I was in Gagetown, New Brunswick, and I was pretty to the people that weren't following all the rules. Like they knew who I was, and I knew who they were. So like at this point in the army, like I could still find my crowd. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because I was gonna ask you about that as far as like just from being in the reserves in the summers when you're 16 and stuff, being in Germany and then being training in New Brunswick, like what how are you able to because you're doing Percocets and oxys and stuff like that, like are you just having to come off of them cold turkey and then you saying that you kind of like are you just kind of supplementing it with drinking or like how are you kind of
no, I'm still active. I'm still active using. I would go home every weekend from Gagetown. to like where I'm from, and that was a 7-hour drive, 6.5, 7-hour drive. And I'd leave when I get off work on Friday, and I'd fly home, and then I'd leave to come back late Sunday and be at work for Monday morning. And most times I would take enough, or like, because at this point I had like a steady paycheck, right? And for like somebody at 18 years old, like the military pays really well. There's no, like everybody kind of knows that. Well, if you don't now, you do, but they paid really well. And I was using the majority of my money to supply my addiction. And, you know, like I was saying, I ran into the right people, right? In that situation, the right people. And I ended up meeting a dealer just outside the base. And I was like, you know, it started out like very secretive. Like I was only going there in like civvy clothes, and I would even wear like clothes that I normally wouldn't wear, so people wouldn't recognize me going into this like place. And you know, like that turned into like I would be getting up in the morning, getting dressed in my uniform, in my combats, and going to this like known drug dealer's house because I didn't care, right? Like at that point, I cared enough to like not admit that I was doing it because I didn't want to like fuck myself in a sense, but I didn't care enough to not actively pursue using.
Right, and eventually you're giving up trying to be incognito about it and trying to drive. You're just like, I gotta get it before
Absolutely.
And still doing like all the kind of training and 5K runs and all that kind of stuff. And,
yeah, like, and pulling them off, right? Like I was one of those weird people. Like there's two type of people when they take opiates, right? There's the people that nod off and fall asleep, and there's the people that get a lot of energy. And I don't know if it was like, you know, like ADHD or what, but it gave me a lot of energy. And you know, I had no pain, so I could do all of those things. Like I was a scrawny little fella, and like a rucksack's not light, and you know, like a weapon's not light, and I was a light machine gunner, so like that's not light. And I was doing all these marches, and like I was keeping up with everybody, no problem really. And if there was, I didn't know. You know, like I think that's important to notice. This is my perspective. Like I can only imagine what perspective other people would have on me in this situation. Right?
But none of your superior officers are saying anything.
No,
you're not failing to meet their requirements.
No, so you know, it's crazy because the only time I got in trouble before I went to Afghanistan was I was at a bar, and I was actually not drinking because I didn't like drinking. Right, I was high, and this guy said that he was the designated driver for this group, and he's going to go to a different bar. So me and my buddy hopped in the car, and this guy was loaded, and we didn't know. Like, honest to God, didn't know. And he tried to make a 90-degree turn going 140. Like, I'm not joking. Like, literally, car went off the road, and we ran into University of New Brunswick, UNB, in Fredericton campus. There's these two signs out front. It's like kind of like an arch. We fucking plowed into the arch to the point where the arch is now crooked. Might still be crooked. But I wasn't fucked up, and I almost got kicked off a tour because they said that I was like actively participating in drinking and driving. And like, he's telling me I shouldn't be drinking and driving. And I'm just after sniffing, you know, like oxys off the back of the toilet. Like moments before, right? So it was kind of a surreal moment. And like, you got to do urine tests to go overseas. And, you know, if I'm being totally honest, like I got high 2 hours before my urine test. And I don't know if it was because it was opiates and like a lot of people have pain, you know, in the army, or like it's prescribed, or at this point it wasn't as recognized. But like I was high before my piss test and I passed. Maybe it was they just grabbed random ones. I don't know, but I passed. And, you know, all of 19 trained in the Red Desert in California, or the Death Valley, essentially. You know, that couldn't really act out my addiction there.
It sounds like it would not be the place to do a bunch of.
No, so I wouldn't.
Red Valley.
Anytime I flew somewhere with the military, like I usually stopped taking, you know, I'd substitute it with Tylenol 1s because Tylenol 1s were legal, and I would just take like talk about fucked up, right? Like I would buy a bottle of 500 Tylenol 1s and need to buy a new bottle the next day.
Wow.
Jesus.
Like I was just like popping 20 to 40 of them at a time, almost on a day. If I didn't have like, like oxys, I was eating at least 300-400 Tylenol ones in a day.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
anytime I'd go, like when I left to go to California, like I brought Tylenol ones, and like for a while they lasted, of course, but then they died out. I don't know, man. It's like the body's incredible, right? Like I definitely, like if I didn't have it when I was home, I was dope sick, and like I was like sitting in bed sweating and showing up to work with like just sweat running down my face, waiting for coffee break time so I could go get high. But when anytime I went, it's weird. Anytime I went to like a desert climate, I didn't really feel those effects. So when I went to California, I didn't really feel the withdrawal effects. When I went to Afghanistan, I didn't really feel the withdrawal effects, which is really weird.
That's what I was going to ask about. Well, two things about Afghanistan was like, the first being just like as a civilian that's never like had that drive. Like I get like your, excitement when you're like 17 or 18 when they're like, oh, do you want to go to Germany? But like you're saying like they're looking for people to go to Afghanistan. You're like super excited. I was wondering like, was it the same drive as like going to Germany, or was it something else? Or
No, it was definitely something else. I think like I mentioned earlier, like my dad, I never felt like my dad was proud of me. And
yeah.
it's my whole life I either tried to prove that I was worthy or prove that I was worthless. Like it was one extreme or the other. And like this was a situation where I could prove some worth.
Yeah.
If I went to Afghanistan, I would be a real soldier. If I went to Afghanistan, like people would be proud of me. And,
Yeah.
like, so it was more like, it was almost like an egotistical thing at that time, and so anyways, I did training in California, and my one day we had 2 days, we went to Vegas. They bussed us to Vegas. Like I remember buying a 60 of spiced rum, and me and my buddy finished it in like a half an hour, like two of us, a 60. And this is after not doing anything for like 2 months, right? And I went to try to get a tattoo, and buddy wouldn't tattoo me because I was loaded.
Yeah.
But he was like, oh, I can pierce something. And I was like, fucking pierce my nipple, man. And like I remember getting my nipple pierced, and I remember going back to the hotel and calling in a working lady, and multiple times in that one evening. So like here I was bottled up for 2 months, right? And the first time I have to act on anything, like I go full tilt.
Yeah.
And like I'm not joking.
Not messing around,
I tried to get every drug under the sun in Vegas, but I was underage, so I couldn't go into the big clubs. Like I couldn't go into like they actually have like underage strip clubs, but as in like you can go in after 18. They're just like non-alcoholic and all this stuff. But like I couldn't find anything else. The only thing I could find was booze and women. And I didn't like booze, but that was a better option than nothing, right?
Yeah,
Of course.
And then, I come home from that, and I would have been 20 years old. I think I turned 20 in California, and I come home from that, and that was just before the new year. That was 2009, and in 2010 I shipped off to Afghanistan, and like talk about fear and all of that stuff. That was a weird time, right? Because I'm like eager to go, but I'm scared fucking shitless.
no doubt.
But I don't want to show that I'm scared. And like I'm also got lots of fear, right? Because like I'm no longer going to be able to do drugs. And like at this point, everybody knows CJ's into drugs, and everybody's kind of hoping, like my mom essentially was hoping that like I'd go to Afghanistan, not be able to do it for so long that I wouldn't want to do it anymore.
That's what I was just gonna say. It kind of like Afghanistan being one of the ultimate detox, because like you said, it's one thing to try and get drugs in Vegas or Germany or New Brunswick.
Yeah.
But like that was one of the questions I had right now. Like, what is it like being in Afghanistan as a soldier? Like, are you like, you know what I mean? I'm guessing probably not very chill to go downtown Afghanistan to try to cop.
Yeah, no, you're not leaving the wire without a group of guys.
Yeah.
So there's no like, and like there's lots I can say about Afghanistan. What I will say, like one thing I'll say about that aspect of Afghanistan is like there was nothing, but there's lots. So in Afghanistan, weed grows freely. Like, I mean, like there's nobody, it's not anybody's plants. It's just like on the side of the road growing, big bud. And it never really had an opportunity to experience, like jump into that right away. So, but there was nothing else. And at this point, you're only allowed to have like once a month, the first Friday of every month, each Canadian soldier could get 2 beer. And like, that was it. Like that's what you got.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny because like I'm not the only alcoholic addict in the military, right? So people would like drink their 2 beer and then go to the Canex and buy near beer because they had lots of like you could buy near beer anytime, and like they would just be pounding back the cases of near beer, and like that stuff's got next to no alcohol in it, right? But it's like people mind got activated, and if alcohol was my drug, like I would have been trying to like pawn my shit off over there to try to get people to trade me their beers, right? Yeah, and a lot of people did too, right? But it wasn't me. But later in my tour, we were in a place. We were in the Panjwai district of Afghanistan. We were right by the Panjwai River, and or the Arghandab River, I guess. And on our side, it was we were on the Canadian AO, like area of operations, and the other side of the river was the Americans, and our job was to secure the route in between. And we built this, like, we had these, so overseas what we slept in was sea containers. If we weren't sleeping in the dirt, we were sleeping in sea containers, right? Mm-hmm. And we had these 2 sea containers with like a hut on the top, you know, with like a heavy machine gun facing down range. And we were filled up sandbags and made like kind of like our own little enclosure. And I was on night duty one night. It was probably like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I watched we were working really close with the Afghan National Army. And I watched this guy like walking up to the barrier and like emptying his cigarette out into his hand. And I was like, that's fucking weird. And then I seen him go behind the barrier and like bend down. And then like I seen a bunch of smoke. And then I seen him get off with a big smile on his face. And I was like, fucking, next time he does that, I'm going to figure out what he's doing. And I remember walking over and like when I came around the corner, he's got like weed crumpled up in his hand and refilling it up into the cigarette. Like that's how they were smoking it, right? Like they were putting the weed in the smoke and then.
And I think that's how in a lot of countries where even weed's gonna get you thrown in jail, right? It's a big deal. That's kind of the technique is you're putting a little bit in your cigarette. Yeah. So that you're not blazing a whole big joint or something and like that.
I mean, Afghanistan's not a first world country, right? So you don't go to the store and buy papers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
you're not going to find a big water bong or a head shop.
No. So crazy enough, right? Like I said to this guy, like, I want some. And then I remember going back to my kit and grabbing a $5 American bill. And I gave him a $5 bill. He said, like, they could understand a little bit and we could understand a little bit of them. And he said, like, tomorrow. And I was like, okay. Well, fucking tomorrow comes and this buddy shows up with 2 fucking pounds of hash. It was shaped the size of a laptop. Like, and the old laptops too, right? Like the thick fuckers. And this was literally just a brick of hash. And the only thing I knew to do with hash was BTs, right? Like bottle toke it up. Yeah. So I fucking made a bottle toke and I showed this guy how to make bottle tokes.
Crazy. Like one of the apps?
Yeah. So I taught him how to make a bottle toke. And I'm not fucking kidding you, man. Like a week later, driving through the town, there was bottle tokes everywhere.
You started bottle tokes in Afghanistan?
In that spot, I definitely taught a few people how to smoke bottle tokes. So at that point, I got dope, right? And still had to keep it hidden. And
who says we don't export culture?
Right?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so, and I'm at this point, like, I was smart about that because, like, it was life or death, right? So it wasn't like, I guess I wasn't really smart about it if you think about it because it was life or death.
Dude in the middle of the night.
Well, I mean, we're working with him, so I like that was okay, but it's more so like I would do it in the middle of the night when I was on my night shift. So then at this point, I found myself volunteering to do more night shifts
because you got a laptop-sized brick of hash.
Yeah, like I'm not joking, dude. This thing was fucking huge, and it was $5 American. And so every night I was doing like BTs and then I remember like my master corporal coming up to me and being like, is it you that's doing it? And I was like, I remember just being like, fuck, I need to be honest. And I was like, I'm doing what? And then I put a smile on. He was like, well, that's enough. So at that point I was like, fuck, like, I think I had a realization then, like, I wasn't just putting my life on the line. Like, they're relying on me just like I'm relying on them.
Yeah.
And
it's not like working at a gas station getting stoned.
that's right, right? Like, I literally, like, I had a deadly weapon in my hand. And at times, like, I was responsible for their 6, right? Like, I had their back. And so I stopped. Like, I legitimately stopped. I gave what I had left, and I had lots left, obviously. I gave what back to the guy, and he's like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, no refunds. Eh?
Yeah.
No refunds.
I didn't want, I mean, it was only
it's
$5
$5,
American,
yeah.
right? So I gave it back, and that was kind of the end of the dope stuff, that type of dope stuff for me in Afghanistan. You know, I don't even know how, like, kind of I can elaborate on Afghanistan. What I'll elaborate on first is I'll say I come home for leave, like halfway through my tour, and I wasn't off the plane, like, and I had the whole, like, everybody in my life was at the airport, and I wasn't off the plane for 25 minutes, and I was like,
let's get ready.
comatose.
Oh,
I was comatose. I'll never forget. Like, like, my buddy was there with a coffee for me, and like, he handed me something, and I put it under my tongue, and I drank a coffee. I let it dissolve, and then I wasn't home. And my house is like 3 minutes away from the airport, and I was fucked up. And I spent 17 days home. A lot of big things happened in that 17 days. I think the biggest thing was, or the biggest addiction thing was, like, I was on her, and I was on her hard, and I had a lot of money, and I blew it, a lot of money, but I was, just before I left to go back, over the news there was an announcement that there was a death in Afghanistan, and it was Sergeant Jimmy McNeil, which is you know, he's the first Cape Brettoner to die in Afghanistan. Also a friend, also a family friend.
Oh, wow.
You know, like, my cousin is married to his first cousin, and, like, so we were like, yeah, it was hard to swallow. And I went to the local, like, store, and I bought a Cape Breton flag, and I went to the Highway of Heroes that they had in Cape Breton for him, and I walked the whole line, and it was a long line, and I got a whole bunch of people to sign this flag. And then I remember, like, family begging me not to go back, because I had to go back, right? Like, I was only home on leave, and people, like, begging me not to go back. And I mean, I had to.
Yeah.
So I went back, and I took that flag with me, and I hung it in Afghanistan in every place I went. And then when I got home, I gave it to my cousin and her husband, who own a pizza shop. So he was related, and, you know, like, she's my cousin, and the flag still to this day hangs in their pizza shop, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But, you know, Afghanistan got a little rough for me after that. What I will say is I took oxys back with me, so I might be one of the only soldiers that were fucking right out of her on pills in a firefight.
Wow.
know?
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you, like, what were the feelings like being in a firefight?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, it got rough when I got back. It seemed like we had a lot happen in the first bit of my tour, but, like, when I got back, we kind of moved into a different position within the unit while over there, and firefights started happening, and deaths started to toll up, and what it was like to be in a firefight. It was super exciting, because, like, you're training for that shit, right? Like, that's the stuff. It's weird, right? Because, like, you think a firefight and getting shot at's, like, it's not very appetizing, right? But, like, that's what we looked forward to, because the alternative was IEDs, right? And that you didn't want to find one of those.
Yeah.
Right. Which for the people who might not be familiar,
Yeah,
IED is
improvised explosive device. So essentially, it's like a bomb, and like that's what killed a lot of. I wouldn't say many bullets killed people. I would say it was bombs. It was IEDs, and so the firefights, like you wanted them until they happened like frequently,
Like so frequently.
and then you're just like exhausted because your adrenaline's high. You're like, like you're super pumped, and then like there's like dead time after it, right? So like you get in a firefight, then you're back at camp. You're just sitting around with nothing to do. It's like it was like a roller coaster, right? But the biggest threat the whole time I was there was IEDs.
How long does a firefight like last? Like, cause like in movies, it's like fucking
Forever,
it could be like
yeah.
forever, right? But like, is that like?
I was in some long ones.
Yeah.
But I'm not that long, really. Like normally, from my experience, it didn't take long for us to get air support, or it's not always wise to stick around and fight.
Yeah.
So we tried. I think for the most part, it was pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's the best way to answer that. But some of them, like there's some where like you're getting low on ammo, you're tired, like you don't want to be the person shooting, you want to be the one taking cover. Like there's those times too. But for the majority, like you're into it, right? And I don't mean like in the sick, vicious, like I want to kill somebody way, but like you're into it as in like it's anything's better than what I've been doing for the last, 24 hours, just sitting around and ultimately doing nothing, right?
Yeah, just waiting for something to happen.
Waiting for something to happen.
and that's an interesting thing where, like, so you're jacked up, and yeah, I mean it's the most excitement than just waiting around for something to happen, but. So now you've been in this firefight. It's your adrenaline's pumped, but you're also you're seeing, like you said, you're seeing death around you.
Yeah.
Maybe there's deaths of your fellow soldiers, and then they just expect you to just go back to go play Scrabble and don't think about it, or how are you dealing? Like that's what I'm wondering.
Like ultimately, I think like you kind of believe that that's your job. Like. People, let's say somebody that works at, we'll use Tim Hortons as an example, right? Like somebody gets up in the morning, they go to their job, whatever happens at their job happens, they go home, they go to bed, and like ultimately, like that's kind of the way it was. When a Canadian soldier died, it was hard. Like the spirits were really low. We lost Corporal Brian Pinkson, which was a friend of mine and head of our company, and like that takes a toll for sure.
Yeah.
But like there's just so much going on all of the time that you don't really have a chance to process it. Right? Like you're literally, before you can process it, because like if it's an isolated situation, like let's say hypothetically speaking, it was me and another guy and I pulled the trigger and he passed away and nobody else was really affected by that in my section, then I would get a little bit more time to process that. Right? Like if I was the one to pull the trigger man most times got a little bit, and I don't know if that's accurate, but I would say got a little bit more time to deal. But ultimately, like it's your job. So you do this shit, then you go back, you try to sleep, and then you get up again and you do this shit again. So you don't have a chance to process, right? And that's ultimately like the most dangerous thing about it. Like the IEDs are dangerous, the gunfights are dangerous, but the mental
like toll
that it takes, I think, is the most dangerous thing.
Because you're not processing it, but maybe like, are you just kind of like you're just talking to your buddies about it?
Yeah, like and that's really all you do. You talk. You have like there's like a little O group, like there's a little group when you get back to talk about the situation, and like if you need support, ask for support, but like you're trained not to ask for support. So you don't say like, hey, I'm fucking struggling. And I found myself in a lot of situations in Afghanistan where you're right, death was present. Some of those situations I was highly active in, And you know, like, did they take a toll? Absolutely. Did I know they took a toll? No.
Like highly active, like you're popping oxys kind of
No, like highly active, like I was actively engaged with the enemy.
in combat.
In
Yeah.
combat,
Okay.
Yeah. So, but like I didn't know that, you know, like I just continued to do what I was doing.
You're just in your mind you're just I'm here to do a job and I'm just gonna do the job.
That's right.
And push through it.
Yeah.
So like in this is like the second tour where it like really kind of started like intensifying.
The second half of the tour. Yeah.
Or yeah, like where you were back on leave and then went back.
Yeah.
And so like this is all happening in like 2010 or
2010 would have been 2010. Yeah, all of 2010. So
okay.
I turned 21 in Afghanistan, and that was in October. So would have been right around that time. You know, my buddy passed away on the 30th of August, and I would say that like then that affected me more than anything else that I was doing.
Your buddy over there or
over there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that really fucked with my head.
Mm-hmm.
We were in this spot where like the previous 12 or 11 Canadians had died. It was called Route Chimo. It's in the Nakonay province of Afghanistan. And you know, like he was out for a patrol and got hit with an IED. And but at that point, like I had a vengeance, right? Like then it turned from like this is my job to like somebody's got to pay.
Yeah, like that's personal.
That's personal. Yeah. And then I noticed myself like not caring about as much things, right? Like, so you're taught to watch where you step, and you're taught to take 2 looks instead of 1. And, you know, you're taught to check under the vehicle when you get out of it and all this stuff. But I noticed myself at that point starting to like just get up and go. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I would like, wouldn't look where I'm walking, wouldn't, you know, like see something, not be overly concerned about it, just walk right up to it. When in all reality, I should probably have like, you know, slowly took my time and make sure I didn't see any trigger points. And, but like my give a fuck factor went out the window. And, yeah, like I'd say like from that moment on, the end of August on, there's a lot of Afghanistan I don't even remember because like my emotions were so fucked that like I could not feel emotions. Right? Like I was a soldier essentially.
Yeah, and you're just kind of like you're getting to the point where there's so much stuff that you haven't processed and so many emotions driving you that you just get to a point where you're just kind of like you're repressed it to the point where you're just not even just on like this.
Yeah, nothing matters.
Yeah.
Essentially nothing matters at that time.
So like did you just like basically wait to process that till you got home or like
you know like
not like I mean not like oh I'm gonna deal with this when I get back to Canada, but like it just was like something that wasn't even on like your radar.
It wasn't on my radar.
Yeah.
And
we're thinking of like when you're gonna process it, but just not thinking about processing it all. Like you're just at a point of like I'm here and I'm a soldier. Like
that's right.
That's it. There's no thinking about feelings or emotions or anything like that.
No, and like on the way home from Afghanistan, you go to what's called decompression. And ultimately it's like a week. We went to Cyprus. So Cyprus is beautiful. One of the coolest places I've ever been on the Mediterranean, you know, like, but in the mornings during the week that you're there, you go to classes on like mental stuff. Like, so like if you're struggling, this is how you get help. Like, these are signs you know you're struggling. This is how you know you're not dealing with things and all these things. But like you got so fucked up the night before that you weren't there in those mornings, right? And you didn't really listen. So I come home. I landed in Cape Breton December 1st, 2010. And I had $96,000 in my bank account. The whole town not the whole town, but there was a lot of people there. The newspaper did this big article on me about how like soldier returns home for Christmas, you know, and January 15th, 46 days later, I had to borrow $500 for a car payment. So did I cope? The best way I knew how. So drugs, relationships, like buying things, friends, like I'd pay for everything all of the time because I always wanted people around. A couple weird things happened for me there, right? Like, so I'd blow 96 grand, which is never easy when you realize you've blown 96 grand.
Yeah.
But I started not wanting to sleep in the room alone. So even in like my most safest place, which is my parents' house, I didn't want to be alone. So I'd always have friends stay over or a girl stay over. Like I never wanted to be alone. And then I started sleeping with things under my pillow. Like I started with, what did I start with? I think it was just like a pocket knife. And then like that escalated to like a machete and then an axe. Like I was sleeping with all these things under my pillow with no idea that I put them under my pillow, right? Because like I was so far gone that I didn't even realize what I was doing in the moments. And I remember like I had this girl over once and like we're fucking around and like she lifts up the pillow and here's this big fucking axe.
That's a little.
I tell you, I've never seen somebody get out of the room so quick in my life. But like that was my reality, right? Like at this point, like so the first night we got home, we went to Swiss Chalet and with all of my family members, and I smoked 2.5 packs of cigarettes in 50 minutes.
Wow.
Holy fuck.
Just fucking
like going hard is like an understatement at this point.
Well, and when you get back, like, are your friends asking you like, what was it like over there? Like, oh, you're a hero and stuff like that. And like, are you talking to them about it? Or
absolutely.
Like...
And I don't know if I'm like talking about the stuff I need to be talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, everything's glorified.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything I did was so cool.
Yeah.
Like, it was an image thing at this point. Like, I didn't like when people called me a hero. Because I still to this day don't feel like a hero, right? Like, I feel like I was just doing my job. But that came, like, it was Hero Returns Home for Christmas or something like that in the newspaper. But like, ultimately, no, I would say no. I wasn't talking about the things I needed to talk about, nor in the way I needed to talk about them.
Well, and like, just your friends and your family and stuff, like, they probably won't really even understand unless they're like have been over there in a similar situation.
And then anybody that has been over there was just like me and didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's like there's no avenue there was no avenue for me to discuss what was going on.
Well, that's like what you're saying, like with like the parallel to like Tim Hortons or whatever. Like it's the same in like companies, right? Like it's like you have HR department, but like they're gonna intervene if shit hits the fan. You're not really gonna seek.
You're going there if you're told to go there.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was what it was like, and
yeah.
So it sounds like you're already suffering. I mean, so because like when you talk about that, you didn't know that you're putting the axe under your pillow. You're like it sounds like you're disassociating from stuff that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Or you're just so high that you don't.
I'm in autopilot essentially, like definitely super high, but like I'm just literally. Security is a big thing, right? Like for a soldier, and I was doing things subconsciously to make myself feel safe and secure, not realizing I was doing it. So ultimately, like an autopilot, like I was, I had like, if somebody opened my door when I wasn't home, I knew it because there was some way that I could tell, like, you know what I mean? Like I'd leave my bedroom and like, I'd put a book behind the door on an angle. So if the book was like standing up straight, or if the book fell over, I knew somebody went into my room. Like I was setting up booby traps in my own bedroom, you know?
Yeah. But and you're just doing it, not thinking like, oh, why am I doing this? You're thinking, I need to do this because I need to feel safe.
That's
so
right.
I need to, just in case something happens, I need to have an axe under the pillow, and I need to know if people are coming in and out of my room, so I'm going to put the book here.
Yeah.
And just not even being kind of aware of like, wow, my mind frame has shifted
definitely.
to a point where it's not healthy.
Yeah, and like at this point, like I'm starting to have dreams, right? Like I'm starting to have like, like nightmares, and then I'm starting to have flashbacks during the day. So like I remember this one time, like I was driving and I swore I was back overseas, and like, I had to pull the vehicle over and like take deep breaths because like that's how intense it was. And these things were starting to happen a lot more frequently. Um, I would have probably hit like a way bigger low at that time if I didn't jump into a relationship. Like I jumped into a relationship really soon after Afghanistan. Every girl I met was the new love of my life, but like this was the love of my life. And um, luckily for me, um, she did help in a sense that like I didn't want her to know I was fucked up. So I put on an act when I was around her. And I think that saved me in the long run because the route I was going was like, I would have been dead eventually because I was just like going hard, right? And when she came into the picture, it kind of like put the brakes on that a little bit, just a little bit, to the point where like there was a little bit of hope and there was a little bit of reason, right? Like,
and you weren't totally out of fucks to give. You were given enough of a fuck to at least want to clean it up a bit for appearances for this girl.
absolutely, but it was always for the girl, right?
Right,
Like, and that's
yeah.
I think the problem, right? It was never for me, but for her in those moments. Like I sort of, so like I'd like to say like I straightened out, but I definitely didn't straighten out. I just I stopped going as hard as I was.
Yeah.
And I kind of did that for like the next year. So like it was, I got home in 2010. It was immediately 2011 because it was December, right? And 2012, so like a full year later, I'm still doing a lot of the security things. Still having the flashbacks, still having the nightmares, still doing the drugs. But at this point, it's well aware, like everybody knows. And like I'm severely fighting with my family. Like they're pushing me away and I'm pushing them. Well, I'm pushing them away. And January 15th, 2012, I remember I come in the door and my mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table. My mom said, "Sit down." I was like, okay. And I'm high, right? And my mom said, like, "You need help." I was like, "No, I'm not. Like, I'm good." Like, she's like, "CJ, you're addicted to drugs and you're not the same person you were before you went to Afghanistan. You need to ask for help." And I was like, "No, Mom, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good." She was like, she handed me the phone and she's like, "If you don't call the military right now and say you need help, you're no longer welcome in our family." And like for the first time I was given an ultimatum, right? Like there was lots of times where I was given them, but like subconsciously, or I mean like kind of low ones, like, like, "Okay, CJ, you can't be getting high. You're going to Afghanistan." Or, "Okay, CJ, there's a piss test coming," but I'd still do it.
Yeah.
This was the first time there was somebody like in my face saying like, "Enough's enough. You need to ask for help." So I did. I called the Padre at the base and I was like, "I think I have a problem and I haven't been the same since I got home from Afghanistan. I need to see someone." And the next day, I was in Halifax at the base, 5 hours away, meeting like a bunch of therapists and addiction counselor and the Padre and all of these things. And ultimately, what came of that is like I got a diagnosis of an opiate dependency, major depressive disorder, an anxiety disorder, severe PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And then in brackets, it said complex. Like I had all of these diagnoses now, but still sitting there doing it for everybody else, right? And they sent me to my first treatment center when I was 22. I guess I would have been 22. They sent me to my first treatment center in Ontario, and my mom come up like almost near the end of my treatment. My mom come up for the family program, and after a day being there, she looked at me and she was like, "When are you gonna stop bullshitting? When are you gonna be you?" Because like my mom knew, right? And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "You're not doing this, CJ." And I was like, "Yeah, I am. Like, I am." And I left that treatment center and I was high like 2 days later, and same path. Ended up now at this point just break up with this, this healthy in my mind relationship, due to like me infidelity, and found myself like super suicidal and like not knowing if I was coming or going. And my mom come up to like live where I was living and try to save me, and going to like appointments every day on the base, and like nobody really knew what to do with me, and they sent me to another treatment center, and like this was a therapeutic community treatment center, and I started sleeping with my evening counselor like 3 weeks in.
Fuck.
And because it was the only means I had to like I could manipulate my way into the situation, and I did. And I did that for like 5 months before, I ended up getting blackmailed by some other dude in there saying if I don't put $2,000 in his account, he's telling on me. And I didn't have $2,000. So I outed myself, and, like talk about like where this shit takes you, right? Like I'm from Cape Breton, like I'm now at a treatment center in Ontario. I go back to Cape Breton, and now I move to Ontario to be with this girl because she's going to save me because she's a counselor.
The counselor at the treatment
So
therapeutic community. Wow.
So she quit her job, and I ended up getting told that I'm going to be medically released from the Canadian Forces. Stay clean for like maybe a month. And then moved to Ontario to be with her. And for the first little while, like I was the Tylenol ones again, right? Like I couldn't get drugs up there. I didn't know anybody. But like a drug addict always finds means and ways to continue to use. And it was like not even a month after being there, I was found myself in a situation where gave this guy a ride, and there was, he dropped some drugs on the floor and I wanted some, and I was right back into it. But Ontario is where it really went south for me. Like we talked earlier about when you knew it hit you, but Ontario is where I knew it like fucked me, like the drugs.
Yeah. Just before we get into that, I had a couple of questions about in Afghanistan, because like you're talking about relationships was a big one for you, and that on the second half of your tour, you number one got into this fucking mode.
Yep.
And that you had managed to take some drugs with you, and I just was kind of wondering, like, as far as like like you said, you're not processing stuff over there, and you're getting into this you end up repressing stuff to the point where you just completely run out of fucks to give, and you're just going, and you're just not being safe and not caring, like in maybe one of the most dangerous environments to throw caution to the wind, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, like, number one, like it's a co-ed army. Did it ever do people hook up as a way of kind of like forgetting about their troubles? Like, was that kind of a thing that happened on the regular?
It was definitely a thing. Like we were our section or our company was tasked out a lot, so like we weren't around like a big base all the time, but there's lots of that happening around. I would say it happened a little bit amongst us, but not to the point where I could really indulge in it, right? I mean, I definitely exerted all those options. Like, there's no doubt that if there was an opportunity, I'd put my feelers out. Like, let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
And like at one point I hooked up with some girl on a base, but she wasn't in the Canadian Army. She was in a different army. And that was really the only thing, but it wasn't anything like, it wasn't a long romance. It wasn't like, it was ultimately just to suppress those emotions, I would say. And it was the only way I could act out. But it definitely happens a lot. Like you could see it around you. Right.
And in your I don't know if it's a unit, the other 6 guys. Section.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was all guys or
all guys. Yeah. So,
okay.
So we had twice we had a female medic attached to us. Unfortunately, one of them didn't make it. she got tasked with a different section, and the day she left, she got involved in an IED explosion and didn't make it. And then the other one, it's funny because the other medic, which would have been the only female around us all the time, ended up getting really close to somebody in our section, and like, you know, that they became an item, and like it was secret at first, and then it wasn't, and like they were going to continue it when they got home and all of these stuff. So it definitely happens, right? It's just you don't really know, like you don't really think of that shit, like, you know, like it's weird, like it's a weird way to explain it because your mind is so focused on surviving that you're doing things just to survive, not recognizing what you're doing. You know what I mean?
You're just like at the base level of like Maslow's hierarchy, or Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's just like you need food, shelter, and
That's
like,
right.
to be alive,
and to not
you know
get
what I mean?
blown up or,
That's
or
right.
shot.
You don't
And
have
if
time
you
to
had
think
an
about that sort of
opportunity
shit.
to like, if you had an opportunity to get out of that, like if you had an opportunity to feel anything more, it didn't matter what it was.
whether it's sex or oxys.
Whether it was sex, oxys, you know, a different mission, you know, a new mission,
A brick of hash.
right?
Yeah.
Like it didn't matter what it was, you were taking it. And that's I mean, again, that's my experience, right? Like everybody's, and that's truly it. Like everybody's experience is different. The guy standing next to me could say a totally different story than I'm saying because the way he interpreted it and the way he processed things is different than I process things, right? And I think that's what makes the whole PTSD, like post-traumatic stress disorder, so complex, you know, and different, is because like what happens for me and what goes on for me generally is the same for everybody else, but like underneath that is not. Everybody's processing and feeling and dealing with things differently, right? And
Do you, like how you're experiencing it and dealing with it internally is different for everybody might have the outward experience of the warfare
that's right.
the same, but the way that they're processing it. And that was kind of what I was going to wonder. Is like, did you notice other people in your section? Do you think that there was people who are a little better at adapting? I wasn't going to like try and make it like, well, do you think the female medics were able to process stuff better, or
I don't
think it just...
I don't think there's much of a difference between the female and the male aspect. Like I think ultimately that's not the difference. The big difference is like each individual. So there are people in my section that didn't deal with things very well, and then there's people in my section that look like they dealt with things very well.
Yeah,
right now, probably the people that dealt with it very well are the ones that are still suffering, and the people that didn't deal with it very well are the ones that are like living fulfilling lives. You know what I mean? Like that's how like that complexity of the disorder is like, you know, like me crying about the death of somebody or seeing death, or like, you know, like watching somebody die, me crying about that in the moment is one thing. You know, somebody else standing there staring at that, not making an emotion or a sound, or, you know, not feeling that is another thing. But then when we get home, or when I get home, like it was affecting me in so many different ways that I couldn't even comprehend what was going on.
wow.
And like, that's the exact same thing that happens in the same way, but like different experiences, right? Like, and it's crazy because like there could be a guy that spent 6 to 8 months in CAF, which is Kandahar Airfield, never left the wire essentially, right? And CAF got bombed all the time. So what the Taliban would do is they would like lob mortars into the camp, or like rockets into the camp, right? It's essentially like spray and pray, right? Like they're shooting and praying that it hits something. And like you can have a person that was in that camp the whole time having the exact same symptoms as I'm having, and I was involved in a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like that's how complex it is. Like it doesn't matter who the individual was, it's how we processed it, right? And like there's a big stigma about people that didn't leave the wire and people that did leave the wire. Well, like that's a stigma, and that's all it is. It's because like that person that, you know, like has to run for cover 3 times a day because there's an incoming bomb, like doesn't make it any worse or better than what I've been doing getting shot at. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because our minds react in like a different.
But
a
I guess
different
it
but
makes
same way.
sense that there's a hierarchy. Like, oh well, you didn't go out and
You weren't
you
face to
stayed in the
face.
base, so you're not as whatever brave or something.
Absolutely.
Like, there's a stigma, but like you said, it's like, well, that's still a terrifying experience. It's still trauma. Like, people don't don't have bombs going off.
That's
and have
right.
to run for cover in
Well,
normal
and
circumstances.
and if we can even go as far as saying, like, you know, like, you could get in a car accident tomorrow, like, you know, knock on wood, but you could get in a car accident tomorrow, and that can have the same effect on you mentally as all of the shit I did has on me, right? Like, that's the complexity of PTSD. And I think people don't understand that, because, like, somebody will say, like, oh, I didn't do as much as you did, or, like, you know, my trauma comes from a car accident. My response to that is, like, but that's your trauma. Like, that's your shit, you know? And so I'm not saying that we're the same. I'm not saying that we're different. What I'm saying is, like, the processing of the emotions that come with that stuff is not happening the right way, you know? And you're coping with those things because you don't know how to process them. And then you have all these other symptoms, right? Where it's like no sleep and nightmares and, like, hypervigilance and all this stuff.
Yeah, but I think that speaks to your character, that you're like, well, no, I'm not going to shame you because you weren't in a gunfight. Like, what you're going through is what you're going through. And we're not going to help each other heal from it without, you know, being aware of it and talking about it. And
Definitely.
saying, like, no, your trauma is real, and it's something that we want to help each other with.
Well, and I mean, like, that comes back to myself, right? Because, like, if I'm looking at somebody else saying, like, oh, I didn't do as much as him, I'm not as good as him. Like, what's that saying? What am I telling myself in those situations, right? Like, I'm telling myself I'm not worthy. You know, I'm worse. I'm essentially not as good as, right? And like, that's where I think it's important. The other people thing is really, like, definitely, but I think it's what am I telling myself? Because I come home telling myself a lot of things, right? Like, there was situations that I blamed myself for, so I'm not a good person. There was things that I seen that I felt like I shouldn't see, right? So, you know, and I didn't do anything to stop it, or I could have done something differently, or, you know, like, the guilt, the shame that I'm putting on myself. I think, like, that's the important piece, because for me to tell you, like, yeah, you didn't do as much, I'm then saying I'm better than, and I definitely don't feel like that on the inside.
Right, because there's all this other stuff. I mean, like you said, there's so much to unpack with the I mean, you know, like we said, we're not gonna get into specific details and stuff, but obviously people can imagine the kind of dehumanizing situations that are gonna occur in a war zone, and the kind of, you know, the wide range of traumatic and death and destruction, all that kind of stuff that
Absolutely.
happens, that you witness. I mean, the one there was where guys were driving in a truck. You said you were comfortable talking about when you guys hit an IED in your truck and you went flying out of the truck or something.
Yeah,
like
so
that?
I there was an IED that went off underneath the back tire of our vehicle, and I was in the hatch, and I got thrown from the vehicle, and I landed on my back, and, like, I've had back problems ever since. Funny kind of aside, like, I got prescribed Dilaudid when I was there, and, like, then, I mean, I was fucking, oh, I'm in so much pain, give me more, right?
You were in the most pain in your life.
Yeah.
Pain
But-
level 10.
But yeah, and,
all
like,
the time.
so that, yeah, those type of things happen, right? And, like, even if you don't, like, we can talk about the idea of, like, seeing dead people, like, that's not easy. No, if anybody tells you it is, then they're the ones that are going to be needing the treatment eventually. We can talk about seeing the inside of a person, you know, like, not inside anymore. That's not easy. We could talk about, like, the blood, you know, like, even just the blood. If you think about it, like, sometimes we got to situations that were over, and all you see is the remainder of the situations, and, like, that stuff is nasty.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, that's one aspect of it. I can go to a different aspect and say, like, dude, I watched in the same river, okay? I watched a guy take a shit. I watched another person get washed. I watched kids drinking the water. I watched kids playing in the water, and it's all running downstream. So like even comprehending that aspect of Afghanistan or the war, right? Like it's hard to do. Like in my mind, I'm literally watching a dude take a shit into the water, and I'm like not even 3 feet over. I'm watching somebody else fill up their water bottles.
Yeah, and watching kids, and it's just having to watch the lack of humanity and watch.
Well, and that's their
kind of thing,
that's their normal, right? But like for me, that's not normal. You know, and like that actually affected me. Really affected me. I remember I got home and I was in a Boston Pizza, and the lady behind me said like to the waitress, "I want a bottle of water," and the waitress was like, "Sorry, we don't have bottled water. Like our water comes." Not from the tap, but like, you know, from our own taps. And the lady's like, this is ridiculous. Like, why can't you, like, you know what I mean? She was going off on this waitress. And I turned around and I was like, can you stop being a fucking bitch? Do you know that people in places don't have bottled water? Like, and I lost my shit, right?
Yeah.
To the point where I had to be like escorted out because like in my mind, like, do you know what the world is like? And
You just thought of that river.
yeah, man, and I think of that like nasty shit that I seen, right? And so I lost my shit, but like it's those little things I found affected me more, right? Like more so than maybe not more so than like watching friends or like people I work with pass away. Like that was really
That's
hard.
got to be yeah. Was that the?
That would. That and like a few of the altercations that we were in that I was like heavily involved in, like those two areas were probably the hardest two areas, and but like when I got home, like because in those moments I cried, right? Like I cried and like you know what I mean? But like when I got home, it was a lot of the other things that really played an effect, which is weird, right? But like it was a lot of those like those little like I think even just like recently, like Halloween was here, right? And like I'm thinking, like these kids are coming to the door to get candy, and like, like we're giving out candy. Like over there, like there's nothing. Like you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like these kids are happy to get an empty bottle of water. These kids are happy to get like, like I used to buy when I was going out on patrol. I used to buy like chocolate and stuff like that, and I used to like give it out because like it felt like the right thing to do. But like the fact that like it was so war torn and so like not up, like okay, so we're sitting here in the living room, like in the living room over there, which is not really a living room, it's just an open space. Like there's a hole in the wall and that's where you're shitting and pissing. Like coming around the corner and seeing somebody squat and taking a shit in their living room, like those things were fucking hard on the head.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because like how I was raised or where I came from or like, what we're used to here, but like a lot of those aspects of it, people don't talk about those, right? Like again, we can talk about the explosions and the gunfire and the death and like
the people that think of, but it's the other
stuff I find really played like took a mental toll that you didn't realize it would.
Mm-hmm.
Like the little simple things.
Well, even like the stuff you're laughing about, like the brick of hash for $5. Like,
yeah.
Here you'd be able to, like, you'd be lucky to get, fucking a hit or two of someone's hash for $5.
Absolutely.
And like, just like, it just shows the disparity of like, the difference there. Cause like, if you try to buy a fucking 2 bricks of hash,
here
it's a little different. Yeah. A little bit more than that, right?
Absolutely. And that's just it. Like it was the differences in humanity that I feel played the most effect and that I feel don't get talked about, because like everybody can say like my trauma is directly related to this gunfight or this, but when you get down behind all of it, like it's the other things they seen. It's the way people have been treated, like the kids are treated, for an example, the way kids are treated there, the way women are treated there, like it's all those little things that really start coming out in people, I find, when you get down to like the dirty of it, right?
Yeah.
And people don't talk about that stuff. Nobody ever comes up to you and is like, was it hard seeing a war-torn country? No, nobody comes up and asks that. Everybody comes up and is like, did you kill anybody? Like that's the question you get, right?
Yeah.
And like people, you can answer that question, but that's not really like that stuff bothers you, but it's the other stuff that I find like a lot of my nightmares aren't about the gunfire and the death and all of that stuff. My nightmares are about like situations that I couldn't control, like abuse or like, you know, different things like that. Like that's what really fucked me up.
Well, it sounds like that was the majority of your time over there, is just being kind of integrated into this like other society, and like, you know, the 5% of the time is when it's like shit's hitting the fan, and 95% of the time is witnessing like just like the chaos of living in that situation, right? So it makes
100%.
sense like that's like so heavily affected, like affects you, right?
Yeah.
Like of
And,
course,
like,
just think of the movie version of, you know, like the
and everybody
firefights,
does,
and
yeah.
everyone's at the
Yeah.
fucking camp chilling, right?
And like, and my reality was like, you know, I'd go out for a 4-hour patrol. I would come back and do 4 hours on a tower and watch this stuff happen. And then I would sleep for 4 hours. Then I'd be back out on patrol. But like, you know, like talk about inhumane, like this guy helped us once, right? Like this local guy helped us out once and pointed us in the right direction, I'll say. And the next day we're out on a patrol and I stopped my section because I seen this thing on the road, right? Well, this dude had his dick chopped off. And they put it in the middle of the road to show the locals that they're not allowed to. This is what happens when you help the infidel, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's the type of stuff. Like, okay, it's funny. I took a picture of it, right? There's a dick on the road, but like when you get back to your tent or your little like hut, and you're thinking like fucking, there's a dick on the road. Like if these people fuck up, it's not like they fuck up like we fuck up. Like if they fuck up or they do something that somebody else sees as wrong, they get punished.
Yeah.
You know, like, and that stuff just like, I don't know why, but that stuff really got to me. And I think it's because like war is glorified. We can watch a million movies about war being glorified, but like anytime any of that stuff comes into a movie, it's always for like humor or, you know, it's never like, this is the reality of shit, you know, like people live like this on a daily.
And that's what, so I guess it's almost, because I was going to ask you, like, what do you think was the scariest thing that happened when you were in Afghanistan? It almost seems like that's kind of ultimately one of the scariest things, is just seeing the kind of lack of humanity in a war-torn country is one of the scariest things, in that it ultimately like seems like it's one of the most traumatizing things.
Yeah, I would say like it's one of the most traumatizing things. It's one of the things that caused me the most effect. You know, like if I was to think about the scariest moment in Afghanistan, like I would have to say it was the moment I first got there, just because I didn't know what to expect. Right? Like, because after that you knew what to expect.
Yeah.
But those are the things that like play on my mind, right? And like even to this day, if I see from my perspective, if I see somebody treating a female inappropriately, or see somebody treating a kid inappropriately, like I instantly go into soldier mode, right? And I need to react. And like it's taken me many years to get to the point where I don't need to react, but I still want to, you know? And like that's the stuff that I think isn't talked about and needs to be talked about, is like it's inhumane, right? And
yeah,
from my perspective, it's inhumane. For them, their perspective, like it's what happens, right? So, yeah. So that's what I would say is like had the most effect on me in Afghanistan. You know,
that was the scariest thing. It wasn't getting thrown from the vehicle when you hit an IED or a firefight, or
no.
That was just the first day and just the
first day, right? I remember going out and we were doing a patrol in Kandahar City, and we're looking for IDs essentially. Like that's what we're doing. We're walking around looking for IDs, and I remember just stopping at everything in the dirt, right, and being like, "Oh my God, what's that? Oh my God, what's that?" And I remember my master corporal being like, "CJ, like fucking walk. What are you doing?" And I'm like, well, there's this thing. He's like, dude, there's nothing there. Keep walking. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he this was his second tour, so he knew.
Yeah, he knows what to look for.
But I didn't.
Yeah.
Right? So like to me, that was the scariest moment. And then like that very quickly evaporated though, right? Like that very quickly became just another thing. Like soon after that I was walking looking like, oh yeah, no, right?
And they're like, hey, you need to be more careful. We're out on patrol.
Yeah, not necessarily, in a sense, yes, but like not necessarily, right? Because day to day, like you're working 24/7, right? So you just want to get your fucking job done. You want to get to bed. That's how you're really looking forward to all the time. So, but I'd say that was the scariest stuff. It's like the stuff you don't think about.
Do you still keep in contact with any of the guys from your section? Like talk to them about this sort of stuff?
I keep in contact with a couple of them. We don't talk about it much. Like we might, if a memory comes up, we might talk about a certain situation, but like it's just not something people talk about.
Yeah. Like do anyone like that you were like over there with like have the same issues of like PTSD and stuff coming back?
Yeah.
Like, would you say that's like a majority of the like?
I don't know if it's the majority. I think a lot of times it goes undetected because people like find healthier ways to cope with it, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely more common than people think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people struggle with it, and like some people struggle with just the fact that like for 6 to 8 months or whatever it is, you were so focused on the job at hand that like you get home and like nothing seems worth it, right? Like there's like what's as meaningful as like like trying to save yourself from dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes I don't know how you could go back to a regular like you said, you can't go to work in a Tim Hortons.
No,
after that,
because that transition's like the transition's fucking hard, right? Because you're like 24/7 high alert for X amount of time, and then you come home to an empty room or a fucking dark bedroom, or like
running tap water,
like like those little things, and so I'd say like they're people are fucked up, definitely. Do everybody get the help, or does everybody reach out for the help? No.
Mm-hmm.
But most people I know have something going on for sure. Like I have an uncle and like he served before me and he was to Bosnia and he knows he's got stuff going on, but like he'll never get help, and he says he'll never get help, but
it's like a generational thing probably too.
Yeah,
to some
absolutely.
aspect, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, that was actually something I was going to bring up. Is the camera on good?
The camera is just dead, so it's fine.
Oh,
it's all good. We'll just continue. It's all good.
Yeah. All right. So, because one thing I was going to ask was, I had talked to a mutual friend of ours in recovery, who's also a veteran, right? And he's a little older.
Mm-hmm.
And he served as well, and he was doing a peacemaking mission in
Haiti.
I thought it was Cambodia.
Okay,
Yeah. So, but that was kind of what he was bringing up, and then you had talked about that, where you're not getting to a point where you're realizing, like, it wasn't until you go to Cyprus after your tour.
Mm-hmm.
That they're trying to fill you in on, oh hey, like look up police and stuff. And
to be fair, they did do some of that before we went,
right?
But like you're not into that stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's what he was kind of saying, is that kind of it was basically like, well, yeah, I mean, you have to be, like you said, when you're in a soldier and it's about survival, you're just trying to do your job, and it makes sense that you have to develop a certain mentality, but it was his opinion, at least, that it wasn't right to send people out, get them to the point where they couldn't process any of this shit, and tell them like, oh, you're not supposed to ask for help, you're not supposed to, and then just say, okay, go be a regular civilian now.
Yeah. And like again, that's the transition, right? Like there's not an appropriate transition. Definitely not appropriate transition for somebody going in that any type of situation like that to like normal life again. There's like, but like ultimate, like in reality, like what are they supposed to do?
Well, that's what I was kind of gonna ask. Like, what if you had to come up with an idea, say, of like what could have lowered some of the trauma, or what do you think would have made it maybe a little bit of a difference, as far as decompressing, as they put it, or just being able to have a little more processing during the tour, because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like before and after they try and set you up, but like it was during the tour that you get to a point where you're not processing stuff, and then you got to a point where your friend was killed, and then you just said, oh, fuck it.
Yeah.
And that's where it sounded like it got. And that happened to be the time where you had brought some oxys back, and that probably made some type of a difference too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I had I don't know if I have a suggestion as to what, like, or an idea of what could make that different. I think like the mindset or the stereotypes and stuff like that around what it is to be a soldier needs to change as a whole. Like, like mental health is a thing now, right? Like nobody's that's not new to anybody here. But like keep enforcing the mental health thing, right? Like it's hard because like like the way the old army was is like you look bad and like you're not strong and you're not all of this stuff. Like that's the stuff that needs to be worked on. That stigma needs to be worked on, right? And how they do that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's the stuff that's where it needs to start, right? Because like Joe Blow's not going to ask for help because he like from what he knows of the army, you don't ask for help.
Yeah, but the reality is, like you're saying, like no matter how tough somebody is, there's no way that you're not gonna get affected.
Oh well, I mean, like we used to joke and say the only people that aren't affected are more fucked up than us. Because like
you'd have to be like a psychopath.
Like a psychopath, yeah. Because like maybe some people are really good at turning it off and turning it on, right? They can go there, turn it off, turn it on and then come home and turn it off. But like from my experience, not a lot of people can do that.
Yeah, because you're thinking like, what could affect this person then? Like if this fucking like crazy,
that's
like
right. What are they doing at
0.1% of like the craziest shit anyone sees doesn't affect them? Like what is gonna set this guy off as like a?
It sounds like if that's not gonna affect you, then nothing's gonna affect you, and then you're like a fucking psychopath.
That's right. Like what are they doing at home, right? Like that's the question. Like what the fuck are they doing at home if they can handle that perfectly fine? Like what in their lives was so fucked up that stuff doesn't bother them?
Yeah.
And like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to call any soldiers down, right? Like if you're dealing with all these things really healthily and like in a good way, I'm not saying that you're a psychopath. What I'm saying is like you need to have a solid fucking base to rest on in order to deal with this stuff. And if you don't have a solid base, which a lot of people don't, I can't understand how you can deal with it healthily.
I mean, like with your story, like you went over there already with a bunch of unhealthy like coping mechanisms. So it only makes sense that you come back from that experience like way more fucked up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it would be counterintuitive to be like, oh, and then CJ like turned a corner and he was fine when he got back, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And if that was the case, like I think more people would have caught on sooner that I wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, my mom used to say like, you left as a young man and you come back as like an elder. Like you've grown in so many ways, some for the better, but a lot for the worse. Right. And, but yeah, I think it's just so fucking mind-boggling to me because like I am in recovery, right? And I do have this opportunity to look at these things, and I have gone to many treatment centers, and I do see a therapist on a regular, and I talk about this shit, right? But like it's mind-boggling to me that people aren't, and that people feel like they can't, because like I know what it's like to be in their headspace. Like I know what it's like to just feel like like, I don't even know how to describe it. I think the best way to describe it is like, the best way to describe that feeling is like fucked. Like, I guess that's like the best way. Like, I know what it's like to feel fucked all of the time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not like a high fucked, but like, I mean, like feeling like you're running in a circle constantly, nothing adds up ever, you know, like you go from being super depressed to super excited to super depressed to super excited. You're watching over your shoulder and like, dude, I could tell you how many seconds it takes for the elevator door to open, how long it takes to get to each floor, how many steps it takes if you go down the emergency exit in a building. Like, I could tell you all of that without, you know, like without even realizing I could. And it's funny because I was at a treatment center and one of the counselors said, like, does anybody know how many steps are in the fire exit? And I was like, yeah, 26. She's like, you don't have a problem. And I was like, whoa, like, fuck. I know how many steps there is in a staircase I only used once, like 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She's like, you're right, there's 26. So like, that's the way my brain was working in so many different ways that I didn't even fucking realize it was working. So can you imagine trying to find some aspect of spirituality in that? Can you try to, like, being, right? Like, I don't know if I was ever in a place to just fucking be in the moment.
Yeah.
Because my mind was so many other places.
So overactive. Yeah, wow. I mean, and that was, you know, kind of getting to where I was going to ask you about, you know, for other people who are, you know, suffering from PTSD, whether it be from a car accident. I mean, there's other people there. Like, I had a friend who
OD'd.
is just, well, he's OD'd and he's just starting his recovery, and he's had, I know, he was a victim of a home invasion, and what, you know, part of it was he'd be like screaming in his sleep and stuff like that.
Yeah, the fear.
And you know, a couple of female friends who have been victims of you know, rapes or assaults and stuff. So for people who are struggling with PTSD, who might not have access to a treatment center or maybe a therapist on a regular basis, what kind of things do you think would be that people, you know, who maybe don't have the resources could access, or things that you found helped you, that you might be able to relate to them?
Yeah, I would say, like, ultimately the biggest thing is like opening your mouth, right? Like, I established this saying, I don't know where it came from, but like, I'm totally unique until I open my mouth, right? And the second I open my mouth, I realize that other people are dealing with the same shit, right? So as both of you know, like, I'm pretty fucking open about everything, and like, everywhere I go, people know some aspect of me, whether it's I'm in recovery, I'm a veteran that has severe PTSD, like, you know what I mean? And I think that's because I open my mouth. And I think, like, that's the biggest avenue of help. You don't need a counselor to open your mouth. You don't need a treatment center to tell you to open your mouth. If you ask, or if you, like, you guys might not be able to relate to the story, but if I come to you and say, like, I have a lot of fear and I have a lot of, you know, like, sadness, you guys can relate to that in some aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, ultimately talking, identifying your feelings, which is really hard for people, but like, saying what you're really feeling. And then, like, my big thing is sports, right? Like, I play a lot of sports. That's my oasis. That's my that's my where I find camaraderie. That's where I find like, moments of, like, just being, right? Like, I play hockey, so when I step on that ice, I'm not thinking about anything else but that puck, right? And like, there's not a lot of areas in my life that I could be in that I'm only thinking about one other thing, right? So like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, something that occupies their mind in a healthy way, whether it be like arts and crafts, or like, you know, sports, or you know, like, anything that you can sit or you can go and do that takes you out of your presence, or your present mind frame, is a means of healthy, like, coping, in my opinion, right?
Right. So it's like you said, especially, and I think that's a huge thing, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked enough about. just in general, whether it be recovery from drug addiction or dealing with mental illness or trauma and stuff, is that it's important to have some kind of passion or something that brings joy into your life that can take you out of those periods.
Yeah,
it's not gonna fix anything, but it's some kind of relief in that, like you said, like when you're playing hockey, you're just thinking about get that puck. Where's the puck? And getting after it, and you're not counting the steps to the fire escape. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
and it's gotta, in my opinion, it's gotta be something other than another person, right? Like it can't be a relationship because a relationship's not going to save me. It can't be a friendship. A friendship can save me in a lot of ways. I can utilize that friendship in a way of saving me, right? Like I can open my mouth, I can talk about my shit. But like a passion, it has to be a passion for something, like, and it can be anything. Like there's some weird passions out there, right? But it takes you out of you in those moments. Like if you can get lost in something that's healthy, I think that's like one of the best medicines. Like there's lots of things right now, right? Like for veterans, there's Soldier On, which is a free program that gives you money towards sport or like activity, and also like holds groups and stuff. There's a big organization called Wounded Warriors Canada. I used to public speak for them. They put on events for veterans and their families, and like cope skills and all these free things for first responders and veterans and stuff. But ultimately all they're doing, like all of these programs, what they're doing is they're inviting you to get outside of you, right? So they're inviting you to be with a whole bunch of other veterans with the hopes of you talking. They're inviting you on a fishing trip with the hopes of you getting lost in fishing. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's all geared towards something that gets you outside of you. Because a big problem we have, like with people with PTSD and myself included, is like, I can be inside of me fucking shit up all of the time.
Yeah.
If I don't have something to get out.
Well, I think that's the good thing too, like you were saying about opening your mouth and starting to talk to someone, because like when you're in that like fucked cycle of just like, oh, like I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this, I'm just stuck, like you can inadvertently get someone to be like an advocate for you almost, and get you involved in that sort of thing, and you know, start hounding you like, hey, come out to this thing, like, oh, we saw you there last time, why didn't you come this week, kind of thing, and
absolutely
it gets you involved, right?
And well, and what I'll say to that, like it definitely, it also, like the act of opening your mouth in those situations, like I wouldn't have done all of these things, right? Like I wouldn't be here if I didn't open my mouth, right? It's as simple as that. If I didn't say I needed help, I wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. If I didn't say I want to play sports, I wouldn't know how to find an opportunity to play sports. If I didn't say that I want to volunteer with first responders, then I wouldn't know that I enjoy volunteering with first responders. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's the power of opening your mouth is so great, but a lot of people don't do it. We all suffer in silence.
Well, with talking about like your experiences so openly and stuff like that, I was wondering like if you ever experienced or were ever worried about like re-traumatization or like getting kind of triggered by like that by sharing your experiences or anything like that.
I'm gonna say no, because the reason I'm gonna say no is because I take so many steps and I put so many things in my life today that my mind doesn't go there. Right?
I just meant like when you first started. Like
when I first stared.
Like if people are like, hey, tell me this, do you find yourself like right when you came back from Afghanistan, like, well, maybe you weren't conscious of it, but.
Yes. When somebody asks me, in the beginning, it was very easy for me to get lost and get aggravated or not re-traumatized, but like triggered.
Right.
But that's why I'm saying the power of opening your mouth, right? Because if you're the one doing it, you're saying what you need to say. If you're waiting for somebody to ask you, it's never going to be the right questions.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So in the beginning, yeah, like it's not easy to answer all of those questions. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those questions cause a backlash, right? Like for me today, like where I sit today, I can talk about things pretty openly and pretty honestly. There's nothing I really hide. There's no areas I don't really want to go. The only place it really affects me, like I can deal with it in a day-to-day life. Where it affects me is my sleep, right? But I didn't start there. Like it used to affect me in every decision I made.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm at the point where it affects my sleep. So us talking tonight, maybe I'll get 5 hours instead of 6.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll wake up 2 or 3 extra times tonight. So it always plays an effect. I think it's what you're doing in the meantime that really helps, right? So like for the person that's still struggling, like open your mouth and ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really easy to say, I need help. You don't have to say anything after that. You've got the attention you need to get some sort of help, right? You got an ear or you got somebody reaching out, but that's like where it starts. And then like that turns into all of these other things, which is sport, which is, like going out as a group with your friends and like that's what that turns into. But the biggest thing I can say is like, don't be afraid wherever you are to say, I need help. Right. And talk about sports. Like I'm in a gentleman's hockey league. Right. And I walked in there and of course, like people drink and I'm in recovery. And the first thing I told this team was like, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I'm in recovery. I have severe PTSD. There's going to be days where I'm off. There's going to be days where I'm unpleasant. I'm giving you the heads up now. If I need help, I will ask for it. And like, because of that, I had a couple people on my team come up to me and be like, dude, I need help. And like, that's the power of one person saying what they need and where they're at.
Just being honest and open. Yeah.
That's right.
That's
right.
beautiful, man.
And that translates into other people's lives. Right. So like if I go for a coffee with this one guy on my team and he really struggling with something. Right. And I go for coffee with him. I don't say anything. I don't give him the world's greatest advice. I don't like talk him through his traumas. I literally just listen. And like that means more to that person because people don't get that, right? People don't have that.
Well, that's why like ever since I got in recovery, I kind of just threw my own anonymity to the wind because I'm like, if me just being like in like a university class or like at work or something being like, yeah, like I don't drink, I don't do drugs, like I'm in recovery and like whatever, I have the X amount of years clean, like opens that door for someone who's struggling to be like, hey man, like how do you do this shit? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like ask about it like they have in the past. Like that's way better to me than just being like, like, oh, I don't want anyone to find out because like who gives a shit, right? Like I didn't care when I was fucked up if anyone found out, right?
That's
like
right, yeah.
I don't care if that.
And you thought you were fooling
out
everybody. That was funny.
I don't care if everyone finds out that I don't do drugs. Like, what a weirdo, right?
Right.
It's like,
absolutely. And like that's the reality of it, right? Is like we have the ability as people with addiction, let's say, to help a lot of people, and not in a sense of like reaching out, grabbing somebody, and like pulling them out of the water.
Yeah.
But in a sense of just being. Because like in today's society, people don't be, right? People aren't themselves. People are always worried about something else. It's always about the next big thing. I joke because like my wife will probably listen to this and I always use my wife as an example, right? But like, I'm always like the one that's like, fuck, like look at what we got, right? And she can sometimes be like, yeah, but. And I'm like, wait, like,
yeah.
Fucking slow down. Like, let's just take this in, right? And I think like that's the gift we get in recovery is we have the opportunity to be present. And a lot of society is not present.
Yeah. Man. That's.
Well, you just get pushed into a position of having to think about, all these sorts of different things, deadlines, like what's going to happen tomorrow. Oh, like there's like
bills,
personal shit. There's all the shit going on in the world on the news and stuff like that. Like, it's just it gets to a point where people are running on like autopilot a lot of the time. They're not even thinking about how shit's affecting them or like like
the next fear, the next want, that kind of thing. But like you said, to just be present.
Yeah,
it's a powerful thing, man.
Yeah, no, it's probably the coolest thing I've ever experienced in my life, right? Like it's funny because like I live close to here, right? So I drive down this road every day to drive my wife to work, and there's a mountain right there, and sometimes she works early, so you see the sun and like the sky, and like I always make a point to say like, look at how beautiful this is. I can see the same thing every day, but in that moment, that is beautiful. And like, people don't do that. People need to go on a vacation to do that. People need to go on a vacation and see blue water and see the sand to say, oh, this is so good. Look at my life. When in reality, there's like so much beautiful things going on around us that we're like totally not even, aware of. And I think like that's the being present, right?
That's one of the things, like I remember in my first couple of years or whatever, like kind of going through like ebbs and flows of early recovery, being like, oh man, this sucks. Like I don't have anything to do or whatever. And just throwing something as simple as like, I'm going to go for a fucking 30-minute walk today. And just noticing like, hey, I didn't know that fucking house was that color. And I walk past her every day. Like that's so beautiful. Like it's so nice. Like that tree I've never noticed or something. Something as simple as that could like just take me out of that funk, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And I just think about like, wow, I'd never be able to appreciate this if I'm just like pushing down all my emotions with drugs, or just like allowing myself to stay in some like negative headspace of like, oh, this sucks or whatever.
Yeah.
And just take a chance to take a fucking walk, right?
Yeah.
Like, just look
absolutely.
At stuff,
Absolutely. And that's just that's the reality we live in, right? Like everybody's got something to do and somewhere to be. Nobody is ever just present. And like, I don't know about you guys, but like that's been the biggest gift for me. Like that's been the biggest medicine. That's been the biggest like spiritual thing, is like, today I'm present. Like I'm doing in this moment, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm okay with that. I fuck up. I don't do well all the time. Sometimes I offend other people. Sometimes other people offend me and I take it to heart. But like ultimately, majority of the time I'm just being. And like nobody can argue with that, right? And I think like that's truly the biggest gift that I've gotten anyways, is just like the opportunity to be.
Yeah, the clarity of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Like I totally agree with that. Like, cause I remember first like year, it was like, oh, like can't relapse because my parents paid for treatment. Like I don't have the money to pay them back. And then it's like, oh, like I'd like to, but it's not a good time or whatever. And then it's just like, I don't even want to, because like, I don't want to lose something as simple as just being able to just like look at my part in things, realize my faults, like be actually able to like understand like when I'm making a mistake, and like the repercussions of that, rather than just being like, oh fuck it, like it'll figure itself out, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's long game stuff though.
Yeah, for sure that's long game stuff.
It's amazing. It's like you said, you have to get a taste of it before you can really start to really appreciate like, wow, this is. But it is. I think it's the most underrated thing.
Absolutely.
Gift of recovery, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think about getting their job back and getting off probation or fucking whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Having some extra money, but yeah.
And it all starts right where the question started. Right, is like, what can somebody do? And that's like, open your mouth, like fucking ask for help. Tell somebody where you're at. Tell somebody what you're doing. Tell somebody what you're feeling. Like that's how you get that end game, in my opinion, right? Because that's the only way to do it.
So for your story, I mean, we got to come back to your where you were before you have these revelations and stuff like that. When you're in Ontario, you've moved there with this ex-counselor that you hooked up with. At a therapist community, and it's starting to go. It's been going downhill.
Yeah. So like I can't fuck. Like my addiction at this point's acting out in every way it can, right? Whether it's like taking advantage of situations, hard drug use. Like I'm still on pills at this point. Still, I only snorted them. I never ever never went intravenous. And the relationship falls apart because like I became heavily addicted to dating apps, and like even in relationships, and I got engaged, paid a lot of money for a wedding, 2 months before the wedding, this girl I slept with contacted my fiance and said, like, I was with your fiance the other night, you know, like, and I remember I was so to kind of back it up a little bit, it's like I started doing, I was doing opiates at this point, and there was one time I couldn't get opiates, but I could get heroin, so I switched to heroin. And then I started, like, I was always on heroin 24/7, and then I started doing it's funny because I want to say recreationally, but I started like periodically doing smoking crack. So I remember when my fiance came banging on the bathroom door, I thought she could smell the crack because I was in that because my thing used to be like, I need to use the bathroom. So I'd go into the bathroom and I'd just be smoking bowls over and over and over again, right? And I remember her coming, like, fucking laying on the door saying, who did you fucking sleep with, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, thank God she's not worried about the crack.
She can't smell it.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and then, like, that relationship ended. And then that was, like, the last bit of security I had. Like, at, the beginning I had my family, and then I had, like, my job, and then I had relationships. But now, like, my family has said, like, we're done with you. I was no longer, like, I was medically released from the Canadian Forces, and now the only connection I had in Ontario, it just walked out on me. And my addiction kind of, I would like to say took off, but I think it was already taken off. At that point, like, I think I got a check for like $26,000, and like I smoked every bit of it crack, like, within a week. And it just took off. So kind of like the next one other thing I'll say about that is to talk about, like, other aspects and cross addictions and stuff like that is I moved into the basement suite of my buddy's house, a basement room, and I was there for 30 days, and on the 30th day he came down and said, I think you need to leave. And I said, why? And he was like, you've been here for 30 days and my kids have met 42 different girls.
Wow.
But, like, that was the insanity of it, right? Like, I was literally, like, I could plan out my day around the girl I needed to meet and the drugs I needed to get better than I could in any other way, shape, or form, right? Like, my reminders today on my phone are like, you have a massage appointment, or you have a counseling appointment, Before it was like, you're picking up Brittany at 6. You're dropping Brittany off at 8. You're picking up Samantha. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I just remember, so he asked me to leave. I got my own place. Kind of what brought me to my knees. Like, I was living in, like, a small 1-bedroom pad or basement suite. And how I got to this point, I can't really tell you. It's a bit of a blur, but I had my heroin dealer living on one couch, and he was on 24/7 house arrest under my control in my residency. So I was his surety. Like, I bailed him out. So I put money up for him to get out. Like, how fucked is that?
Just so he kind of have him in your pocket,
protecting your supply.
Yeah.
And then, like, I had my crack dealer living on the other couch. Like, so I had 2 couches, and I had a heroin dealer on one and a crack dealer on the other. And I just remember going into my room at night and just, like, wanting to be dead. Like, I just wanted to be dead. There was no other desire in my life but to get high and be dead. Yeah. And I just didn't want to do it if there was drugs in my system, because I didn't want my mom to know that I was fucked up. Although she knew I was fucked up, I didn't want her to have to, like, deal with that. But I just remember laying in bed, man, and I remember this. I was about to get paid, and the only thing I made sure was paid on payday was my rent, because I didn't want to be homeless, right? And I remember getting paid, and I went back to the house, and I said, I'm done. Like, I'm ending this. and I bought a lot of heroin, like 3 grams maybe of heroin, and like I had this weird addiction to like Big Macs and Kit Kat bars. Like they were my like, like when I got fucked up, that's what I needed to be complete. And I sniffed the whole like 3 grams in one line, and I got in my car, and at first I sniffed it, and then I laid in bed, and I was like, oh my God, I can't die without having one more Big Mac and Kit Kat bar. Like, what the fuck? And then I get up, and I remember driving, and for some reason I took the back roads, and I never took the back roads, right? Because it was always like quickest, like get me fucking there and get me back. And I took the back roads, and my brother was drunk out east, and he sent me a text, and I pulled over to answer it. Normally I'd just text and drive, right? Mm-hmm. I pulled over to answer, and I woke up 6 days later. So I OD'd. It was the only time I've ever OD'd in my life. I woke up 6 days later. I had thrown up everywhere. I had shit everywhere in my car. The gear shifter was indented into my stomach. Like I fell over the gear shifter. Car was out of gas. Phone was dead. I OD'd and I woke up. And
6 days later.
6 days later. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody
just
stopped.
In the back roads of Ontario.
Back roads of Guelph. I had really tinted windows so nobody could see in the car. And I woke up, and being the military guy that I was, I had a go bag in the trunk. Right, I always had a go bag, so if I had to take off, I could. I got changed. I put a towel over the seat. I drove back to my house because that's where the heroin dealer was. I got high and I went to the hospital. And the doctor said, it's funny, he made a joke and he was like, all that grease you eat kept you alive. And I was like, what the fuck? My body went into a coma for 6 days. And the only thing I wanted to do when I woke up was like get fucked up again. And I just remember like it was like 2 days later, and I'm sitting there next to these two guys, and we're playing Tiger Woods on PS3, and above the TV I have this flag, a Cape Breton flag that I got signed at the first treatment center I went to, with all these people's names and shit, right? And I just remember fucking playing, and it was my swing, and I was Phil Mickelson. I remember like it's clear as day, and I looked up at the TV, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I was really fucking high, but I swore the TV went dark, and instead of the light projecting out towards me, it projected onto this flag. And like the big book, talks about a moment of clarity. I don't know if that was one of mine, but like in that moment right then and there, the only thing I could think of was asking for help. And I remember going, like, I put down the remote and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, shoot. Like, and I was just like, give me a second. And I walked outside, and I remember calling my mom. My mom could tell if I was high by the way she wasn't even on the phone yet, and she knew how she was going to respond to me because she could tell, right? And she was like, yep. I was like, I'm down and out. I'm done. She was like, oh, whatever, CJ. I was like, no, Mom, like, I need help. She was like, I want your cell phone, your car keys, and your wallet. I was like, deal. Because every other time she wanted those things, I'd never give it to her, right? Those were my lifelines.
Yeah.
And she was like, I love you, son. Don't give up. I hung up the phone and went right back to doing what I was doing. 3 days later, I was going outside for a smoke. I remember coming around the corner and watched my mom and dad pull in the yard in their SUV. So they literally left when I'd called and drove constant. Stayed one night somewhere, but drove full tilt to get to me. And I hit my knees and I started crying. I couldn't fucking believe that they're I think what it come down to like is I could not figure out a way out.
Yeah.
Like in every situation I've ever been in my life, there was a way out. And in this situation, with a guy that I bailed out here who's breaking all of the rules and like, you know, and then like I just couldn't find a way out of the situation. The only way I could get out was asking for help. And you know, like God loved my mom and dad. They decided that time they were gonna give in to what I was saying, and they drove from Cape Breton to Guelph, Ontario, and I didn't stop using that day, because like I was on so much shit that like literally the doctor said if you were to stop right now you'd probably die. So like I gradually worked myself down, and then I repeated that phrase, right? Like going back to what we were talking about, opening my mouth, like I repeated that phrase. So I called Veterans Affairs and I said, I need help. I called the chaplain and said, I need help. I called any avenue I could and said, I need help, until somebody was willing to give me help. And, you know, in June of that year, fucking, I was on a plane and my mom looked at me and said, they got a place for you in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And I was like, I have no fucking idea where that's at. But
Yeah, same
anything and everything is better than this. And the next day I was on a plane and I came here and like I dove in. Like I think, you know, like people talk about a bottom and like where you have to get to like to actually stop. And like for me, it was that. It was like I couldn't figure out a way out. And if I could still have figured out a way out, then this treatment center wouldn't have worked. You know, recovery wouldn't work for me because I had an out. And this time I just didn't have an out. There was no fucking way I was getting out of that situation without somebody intervening. And like, that's ultimately what it come down to. It was just fucking me dead in every sense of the word, begging for help. And that's what brought me here. I think like, again, I'll say like going back to what we talked about, right? Is if I don't open my mouth, if I don't say I'm struggling, if I don't talk about this shit, then nobody's going to reach their hand out. And I was lucky enough that my mom and dad did. So I fucking flew here and I dove in. I think I guess I would say I dove in. I remember the first day I got to treatment, I walked in with my counselor and we sat in the chapel and I was like, okay, so this girl's beautiful. I'm going to try to fuck her. There's drugs behind that desk and there's only 2 nurses on at night. And I know I can get in there without them finding me. The windows don't lock. So I'm going to try to escape. And like, I just remember him saying to me like, slow down. It's day 1. How about you don't do any of that stuff right now? And I was like, okay, you know, like, fucking tell me what to do, I'll do it. And you know, at that time I was like, I got a counselor that like I'm still very fond with, and she said, what are you willing to do to get better? And I said, anything you tell me to do. And to this day I listen to everything she tells me to do. So in that she said, you know, you're in an unhealthy relationship, end it. I ended it. She said, don't go back east. I didn't go back east. You know, she said, stay here in Nanaimo. Okay, I'll stay here in Nanaimo. You know, and like, I kind of did whatever she said because, again, I had no other options, right? And it's like, we'll be at 4 years before I know it here. And like, I'm so grateful for that. The biggest lesson she taught me was to just be. You know, she used to make me sit on this couch and I wasn't allowed to start a conversation. I wasn't allowed to engage in conversation. I just had to sit there. The only way I was allowed to talk was if somebody asked me directly a question. And I sat there for a month straight. And sooner or later, people knew that I wasn't allowed to talk, so they just wouldn't talk to me and like they'd talk around me, knowing that I couldn't do it. But it taught me a lesson, right? Like it taught me to just be. I started noticing things like we're talking about, you know, like I started noticing the woodwork in this place. I started noticing the fish in the fish tank. I started noticing who was coming, who was going, but like not in an unhealthy way. And, you know, like I practice that to this day. Like I try to take those moments to just fucking be. And again, it comes back to what we talked about, right? It's like seeing the things we're not used to, or appreciating the things we're not used to appreciating.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that's what I think I had that as a question written down here. Like, Was that always was there stuff that, or was it a lot of things that you didn't realize you appreciated? I remember you talking about just coming back from Afghanistan and just like you can't even describe how much you appreciate just running water.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think, is that kind of a big, because I kind of wanted to like wrap it up for somebody who's, you know, struggling for the, maybe they're in their first week or their first month, or, you know, even people in their first year, man, that are struggling, you know, to try and kind of sum up the things that you had been talking about that made the difference for you, with just like being honest, being willing to do whatever it takes to get healthy, not trying to find an out,
Yeah.
and opening your mouth.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I would say, like, a big thing is just like take a moment to look at what you do have opposed to what you don't have is a big thing. And like, yeah, say I need help. If you're struggling, and you're right, there's a lot of people, like the person that's, you know, a couple days or a week in is struggling, and people know that they're struggling. But it's still important for them to say I'm struggling, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The people that are a year and a half that are struggling, those are the people that don't say I'm struggling, you know? So like my advice to them is like, continue to talk.
And that's the thing, is that they're in a dangerous position because people think, oh, well, you got a year now, and they might assume like, oh no, they're good now, but it's like, no, like we live with this thing, and just because you got a year under your belt doesn't mean that you can't struggle. And like you said, I mean, the dangerous part is that after a year, you might be less inclined to ask for help than somebody who's new and it's super raw, right?
That's
but
right.
It's at every stage of recovery, or even getting to recovery, it's about asking for help.
Yeah. And that's, and you know, like, and we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it tonight, but like I public speak, right? And I go to schools, and I go to like events, and I talk about things, and like my message is always the same. My life story, or the way I tell it, every time is different. Like tonight, the way we talked about it is different than I said it last Saturday when I said it, like, you know, but ultimately the end result, I always try to focus on the same thing, and it's like asking for help. Like, I'll tell you a really quick story. I spoke at this school in Niagara Falls, and I was just supposed to be the supporting cast to this guy. So this guy wrote this book, and it's all poems about PTSD. And this school was honoring this guy, and I was supposed to be the supporting cast. And I started sharing, and I was sharing honestly and openly, and it was to a whole bunch of grade 12 students, grade 11 and grade 12 students. And kind of halfway through, the questions weren't being directed at him, they were being directed at me. And they were asking some intelligent questions. But at the end of the conference, I said, like, there's people in this room that are struggling. And like you can hear like, And then I said, I want anybody that's struggling to stand up. And of course they're kids, right? Nobody wants to say I'm struggling. And like, to my surprise, these 3 people stood up. And I said, like, no pressure. Care to share, like, what are you struggling with? And like, not a word of lie, this one girl said, like, I've been getting abused my whole life and I didn't realize it. And this other guy said, like, I'm super suicidal. And then this other guy said, like, I'm really confused about my sexuality. Like, and that moment, I knew that the only thing a person can do is ask for help, because you could see the freedom in those people, you know. And I'm still in touch with 2 of those people today. And I get a message every year on the date that I spoke from those 2 people saying, if it wasn't for you saying it was okay to ask for help, I wouldn't have got the help. And like, those are the things that are important, I think, right? Is like opening your mouth frees you from all of that shit, right? And so I guess bringing it back, like my advice to anybody that's new is like, if you talk about what's really going on, somebody will help you. If you talk about like what's really going on, not what you want people to think is going on, you know, not what would look good in somebody else's eyes, but like what's honestly deep down inside going on, you know. And you tell me you're fucking scared that you're going to get high, I can relate to that. You tell me, you know, you're anxious because you know, the dealer just picked up. I can relate to that. You know what I mean? And I think like that's kind of what our job is now that we've got some time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like if somebody says something in like an organized place, right? If somebody says like, you know, I when I go home, I'm gonna be alone in my room, and like I don't know if I can do that. Like it's our job to be like, yeah, you can. We got you, right? But we don't do that unless somebody says, you know, what's honestly going on. And I think like that's my biggest advice is like put yourself in situations to ask for help. I think overall, yeah. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there. But
No, man,
I was fucking feeling it.
That was a powerful story and just a powerful podcast. Like overall, man, that was really awesome to hear. You know where you're coming from and where you're at now. Like that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, that was
good.
wow, dude. That was. I mean, so do you want to put it out there, like where people get if they want to get you to for motivational speaking and
yeah, definitely. I mean, my name's CJ Wilniff, and you can pretty much find me on any social media platform. I'm not very hidden, and it, you know, and I'm into it. Like I love this shit, right? Like I love this shit. I'm it's funny because like I'm about to become a father, and my baby, every time my wife drinks pop, goes crazy, and I'm just like, I'm so excited to be the dude that helps this kid fucking get through the shit that I already know he's gonna struggle with. You know what I mean? It's like I know this kid's gonna be an addict, but I'm gonna be here, you know? And so yeah, like you can find me pretty much anywhere, and I'm into it, man. I love this shit, and I'm glad you guys had me on. I really appreciate it. I think what you're doing is great. And I think that giving people an opportunity to talk about things that aren't necessarily talked about is like super important. And like you got my highest praise for doing that.
Man, we could have asked for yeah, man. That's wow. It was such a good podcast, man.
Yeah, man.
It was. Thank you so much for coming on here, brother. And yeah, man. I think.
Just end with just the regular plug of like if you guys want to come on to the podcast, or if you have any questions, concerns, or you want to ask about like, you know, anything we've been talking about, or you have a certain question that you want us to address or topic you want us to address in the future, just email us at highlyaddictivepodcast@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, at Highly Addictive Podcast. We're gonna have video format as well. This was the first trial run. Both our cameras died midpoint, but you know, we're gonna figure it out, and hopefully we're gonna be able to raise some money through that fundraiser that we're setting up here to get some better cameras that have
some batteries or
longer battery life. Yeah, exactly.
Chargers.
Something we can plug into the wall or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been the Highly Addictive Podcast, guys, and thank you so much for listening.